Superhero fatigue. It's one of the most talked about subjects in the genre. If you've never heard of the term, then you probably resonate with the idea. You might be getting a little tired of superhero movies, but is it real? Well, kind of. But I think it's more complicated than people are just getting tired of superhero movies. If we take a look at the superhero movies that came out this past year, 6 out of the 8 DC and Marvel movies flopped hard. But Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse came out, both of which smashed all expectations, universally having both critical and commercial praise. There was also Ninja Turtles, which was a big success, but I'm mainly focusing on Marvel and DC here. So clearly superhero fatigue isn't entirely true if this past year 3 superhero movies were received very well. So why did these movies do so well when the majority of superhero movies have been flopping lately? There's a reason why they succeeded while the majority flopped, but it's more complicated than you'd think. To get to the root of the problem, there are 3 main superhero universes. We got the MCU, the DCEU, and there's also Sony's Spider-Man universe.
It's Morphin time.
They've all been running into problems, but if you take a closer look, all of their problems are unique to themselves. Let's take a look at all 3 of them, starting with the MCU. Yeah, everyone knows the MCU has decreased in quality drastically in the past 3 years, but let's get to the root of the issue. Backtrack to 2012, and the MCU was on top of the world. They came off their most successful film yet. Year after year, they put out win after win, all of which pointing towards this huge climactic finale. Now, it's no secret that the MCU peaked with Infinity War and Endgame. So, after that, what's next? Endgame bookended the series, and any movie or show that takes place afterwards seems to have no finale to build towards. Back when they were at their most successful point, they had a clear goal that they were building towards. But post-Endgame MCU might have a climactic event that they're building towards, but what's the point of keeping people around using this tactic when they have no idea what the climactic event is? If their next climactic finale was supposed to be Avengers 5 and 6, they're gonna have to either majorly rethink those ideas or just scrap them entirely because the actor of their next main villain just got fired.
That's it. I'm out of ideas.
Their loss of direction isn't their only problem though. Far from it, there's actually much more. It should be self-explanatory that their quality has dropped a lot, and I could just leave it at that, but I want to go deeper than just saying MCU bad now. Their decrease in quality can be tracked almost entirely to the oversaturation of content. Take a look back at 2021. It was very exciting actually, because the last MCU project we had gotten was over a year and a half ago. So it was exciting to get any new content, regardless of the quality, and to have a year where we get 4 movies and 5 TV shows was amazing. But after the hype settled down, we all started to realize that the quality of these new ones does not match the old. Their TV shows are just bland movies that did not need to be stretched out into TV length, and their movies are almost all bland and unoriginal. You see, due to the oversaturation of content, they can't put as much time into these projects, so they go the safe route by making predictable stories that we've seen many times before. Now there's another factor related to the oversaturation, and that's simply due to the fact that people don't have time to watch this much content. Back when they would put out 2 to 3 movies a year, that was very manageable for even the most casual viewers to watch. But the amount of content they have now makes it hard for anyone, no matter how devoted to the series they are, to watch everything. I figured now would be a good time to stop and not talk about Raid Shadow Legends, and instead address half the story by answering a question I posed at the start of the video, which is why were Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse so successful? Well, both of them for different reasons. For Guardians of the Galaxy 3, it's crazy that we've gotten to this point, but it was dealt a very bad hand by being an MCU movie, but it was able to overcome that. The movie was marketed less like an MCU movie and more like a James Gunn movie, and James Gunn was given the freedom to make the movie he wanted to make, so it feels like a James Gunn movie and not a factory-made MCU movie. Beyond that, it had an incredible word of mouth. It is a beautiful send-off to 7 characters that many of us love, some of us have even grown up with, and it gives an incredibly satisfying ending for each of them. And many loved Across the Spider-Verse even more. To start, the animation is revolutionary due to the overworked and underpaid totally reasonably worked and properly paid animators. The first one literally reinvented animation as a medium and sparked a new generation of animated films, turning away from realism and leaning into the overexpressive nature of animation. And then it was topped by this one. Every frame is properly animated in a different style that overemphasizes these characters and their emotions. I know everyone has talked about its animation to death, so I'll shut up about it now, but beyond that, it takes full advantage of its multiverse concept, unlike other movies, and really explores some crucial consequences of being Spider-Man that we've never seen on screen before through that concept. When people heard about all this, and with how much they loved the first one, everyone flocked to see it. Now make sure you stick around for the rest of the video, because this is only half of the story. Of course, the main attraction of this video would be the ones that didn't get the same treatment as these, which makes superhero fatigue an interesting discussion of whether or not it's real, because we're comparing two very different sets of movies. Now, to understand this, I need to cover two more superhero universes and their problems. And I swear it's interesting, so stick around, because their problems are different and unique from Marvel. I just covered Marvel, but DC has their own set of problems also. More specifically, the DCEU. To make sure everyone is on the same page, DC is obviously the comic for characters such as Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, Aquaman, Black Adam, Joker. The DCEU basically tried to be the MCU equivalent, but for DC, and it consists of all of these projects. Now that we're all on the same page, the last 8 theatrically released DCEU movies were all bombs. Now there's a root to all these flops that's unique from Marvel. To understand this, we gotta go to the beginning of this mess of a universe. They started in 2013 while the MCU was starting to grow in popularity with Man of Steel, which was a Superman movie. This movie definitely has its fan base, but it also has a massive crowd of people who hate it. This movie takes a much darker approach in Superman instead of going the traditional bright and happy route. And some liked that approach and others didn't. Even though this movie was and still is very controversial, it was released during the hype of the MCU, so it made a profit. But to have a divided fan base isn't the best way to start your universe. Their next movie was Batman vs Superman, and same exact thing for this one, except more extreme. Many people call this movie one of the best and most complex superhero movies of our time, while others see it as a convoluted mess of too many poorly executed ideas. But again, it was released during the rise of superhero movies and close to when Civil War released, basically the Marvel equivalent, so it made a lot of money. Their next 3, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Justice League, all had different critical stories, but their box office numbers were very similar. So, the first several were able to catch the superhero movie rise hype to make money regardless of their quality. But people started realizing that these movies were mostly straight up not very good and stopped caring, which explains the massive flops as of late. But it was a very gradual decline, and the first few bombs were tied to their respective problems. Their first sign of decline was actually with their most successful movie, Aquaman. Aquaman was somehow able to pull $1 billion, but almost all of that was internationally. The movie only made $300 million in the US, which isn't horrible, but it's not that impressive either. How it made $1 billion worldwide beats me, but something about this movie clearly resonated with foreign audiences. Which, that's great, but they're generally not the target audience for these movies. Shazam was the next movie, and it only made $300 million worldwide, but it was still profitable because it had a lower budget. Now those last 2 were technically not bombs, but it's clear that audiences were losing faith in the DCEU. The first actual bomb was Birds of Prey. It only made $200 million worldwide. Now this is partly due to the fact that it was released right before the COVID outbreak, and it was also rated R, so this movie just got really unlucky. Next was Wonder Woman 1984, and this only made $170 million. Again, this is tied to it being released around when COVID was still a thing, and it had a simultaneous release on HBO Max. and the movie was straight up garbage. And then the next one was The Suicide Squad. This one was actually really well received, but it only made $170 million. This is due to, again, the simultaneous release on HBO Max, and there is also the R-rated factor, and the first one was trash, so not many people wanted to check it out. The last three bombed due to individual problems, but Black Adam was next, and this will be the real test if people were getting tired of the DCEU, because it didn't have any of these weird problems in its way. It pulled almost 400 million worldwide, which is better, but still not profitable. It's very interesting that this movie bombed because it didn't have any of these restrictions, and it was fairly well marketed. So why did it bomb? Because it's bland and unoriginal. You see, people had lost faith in DC, for good reason, so when you have a movie that's just kinda bland, no one's gonna want to watch that. Well anyways, this movie bombed, and it set the course for the recent dumpster fire of DC bombs. Shazam 2, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman 2 have all been record-breaking bombs. But there is a good reason for this, okay? This guy, James Gunn, he directed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, he also directed the Suicide Squad. Yeah, DC liked what he did with the Suicide Squad, so they told him to literally reboot this universe after Black Adam bombed, because they realized how big of a mess it was. But they announced this in late October of 2022, shortly after Black Adam came out. So there are still 4 more movies that already had too much money put into them that they just kinda had to barf out. No one was really interested in these movies because they were all originally made with the intention of continuing to expand this universe, but this universe is now literally about to die, so there's straight up no point in watching them. They all came out and they're all okay, I guess, but that wasn't enough to save them. It's also worth mentioning that Joker and The Batman were both extremely profitable. But why? Well, it's actually super simple. They now have been labeled as DC Elseworlds by James Gunn.
Our jobs, mine and Peter's, is to come in and make sure the DCU is connected. And if something is outside of that, like Matt Reeves' Batman or Todd Phillips' Joker, that it is clearly labeled as DC Elseworlds.
So that means that they're DC movies, but not set in the DCEU. And I think this reinforces my point that DC's main problem is due to a loss in faith in the DCEU, because audiences were clearly willing to give these other DC movies a chance. Well, that and the fact that they're rebooting super soon and these new ones don't matter, but that came from a loss of faith in the first place. And now this final section will be a lot shorter, but it's also worth mentioning the SSU, Sony's Spider-Man universe. You see, the MCU started off very successful and then fell off in recent years. The DCEU was admittedly a good idea, but was butchered since the beginning. Sony's Spider-Man universe was just a bad idea to start with, so when movies like Morbius flop and Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter are also going to, don't be surprised. But why is this universe a bad idea in the first place? Well, because there's no Spider-Man. Instead, they're making films about Spider-Man villains and turning them into protagonists.
I'm the protagonist.
Which is just straight up stupid. The thing that makes these villains interesting is their conflict with Spider-Man, and without him, you gotta make up an entirely new story that forgets what makes them work in the first place. This universe is just a mess. With all that out of the way, is superhero fatigue real? Again, it's complicated. I think the reason why this subject is being talked about so much right now is because so many superhero movies have been bombing recently. But I think the reason that they bombed is not because of superhero fatigue, but rather tied to their universe's specific problems. The stupid Ant-Man movie and the Marvels bombed because people lost faith in the MCU. The last 4 DCEU movies bombed because the reboot is happening soon, which makes these movies meaningless. And Madam Web isn't out yet, but it isn't tracking well. But that's because it's in Sony's Spider-Man universe, which I already discussed why that's a bad idea. So, is superhero fatigue real? I'm gonna have to say no. These recent superhero bombs are not because they're superhero movies, but rather because of their circumstances. The future for superhero movies honestly looks bright. The MCU is seemingly slowing down on production to put more time into their projects. It's possible they can make a comeback. The DCEU is being rebooted by one of my favorite directors, and I think a lot of other people feel the same. And there are other promising projects, like Joker 2 is coming out later this year. The Batman 2 is coming out at some point, and Beyond the Spider-Verse. The future for superhero movies honestly looks promising. I said it looks promising, okay?